would like to start by first getting us a little bit familiar about who I am. Usually I will skip this part, but I think it's fair to know that you understand where I'm coming from, so that when I teach, that you see what kind of angles I'm looking at. So my name's Andre. Hello. And some of you know me and some of you don't, which is okay. This is normal. I was born in Serbia and in a village. And I mostly spent my life with cows, chickens, and pigs. So this is normal in the village. So I'm sort of, a little bit of old school in some sense, but then again, that's the Serbian village life. So my first language is Serbian Croatian, and I still speak it very well with my parents or whoever talks to me. And after some time, we decided for a sort of improvement of lifestyle, we decided to move to South Africa because my dad knew some friends there. And he knew a little bit of English. So it was very strange because one day we didn't speak any English, and then the next day we're in a country that speaks English. So I had to learn English very quickly in South Africa. So that was very nice because I made a lot of good friends there, and it introduced me to a whole different lifestyle, because Serbia and South Africa, they're different in a sense of culture. It was very dangerous in South Africa in a sense because we were always protecting ourselves from, we had like fences, electric fence, and 2 dogs that always barked for everyone goes past the gate. So, and we had a gun. My dad bought us, well, not bought us, but for the family generally, we had a gun, and you generally have a gun there. My brother shot with a gun once because someone jumped over into our backyard. So my brother took action. He missed, luckily. He was only 11, I was 9, but this is the normal situation. And then again, for better lifestyle, we decided to go to Australia. And it was in Australia really when things started to take off, because in both Serbia, I was generally a worker, laborer. That's how you are. Whether you're 5 years old, I helped my parents build a 2-story house when I was 5. So this is normal there. It's not a big deal. And in South Africa, I didn't really get any pocket money or any kind of commissions from my parents so that I can buy toys or anything. So I really started to get hungry for having things. Okay, so this grew into this sense of how can I get things? And my dad always told me, Andre, ask, how can you think, how can you get things? So this caused me to always think for myself independently. So in Australia, I got my first job, and that's when things took off, when I bought a memory course, and that really set a foundation for my life because it helped me to remember really well. And it's called Mega Memory. So this course really opened up a whole world to the world of success, which I was absolutely fascinated by, because before it was just a simple life. It was the village life, and it was the life in high school. So after some time, I thought that I want to, expand. I want to know about myself because all of this information was now coming in. And my dad always told me that Andre will be successful in business. He just saw this business person in me, which I wasn't really interested in because I didn't understand what that meant. But very quickly, maybe I took that advice too seriously, because already in high school, my eye was already on independence and how to succeed in this world, that means materially. So already by high school, grade 10, I was already reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and many success books, Tony Robbins and motivation books. And people could understand, Andre is so young, and, people your age are, talking about cars and sports and girls, but you're just constantly focused on the success at such a young age. And I just couldn't help myself. And I guess that's because of the lifestyle that I lived. So very soon, I think it was around 22 or 3, I already was sort of financial independence. I could have stopped working and then, free for life. But I didn't, because I was just very fascinated into business. However, because of this early success, very early, and yes, I did make a lot of mistakes. I lost businesses maybe 5 times because of different legal issues, intellectual property, copyright, and so on. So it's a complicated world. You got to constantly maintain and grow it and be there. But it taught me how to succeed and get up when I fall down, not only once, but 5 times over and over again. So it's kind of like those who run a business that will know that it's kind of like losing a child, because you're so attached to your business that if it crashes, you're like, oh my God, what do I do now? But I remember I always thought, no, what's next? How can I solve this? So this taught me problem solving. And it sort of became a spontaneous mentality to constantly ask questions and inquire how to solve problems and think. So because of this, I started to ask questions that I couldn't get out of. And because of that success, I said, okay, this is fine. I have this and this and this and this and this. But the question is, how will more make more difference, and to whom? In other words, how will more of this make more difference, and to whom? Who is the benefactor who's receiving this benefit? And that question, once it came, that inquiry, I could not get out of it, because it was always stepping above whatever I got. So whatever success came, I thought, okay, great, but how will more of this information, more of this practice, more of this meditation, more of this experiencing high states, more of this yogic practices, 10,000 asanas, you give it to me, I'll do it. But then I asked, well, so what? How is it making more difference? And to whom? Who is this person who's benefiting? So this eventually turned into the questions that converged into this subject I. Who is this I who is obviously actually not benefiting? Because if the I was benefiting, then the question would have never came up in the first place, if you think about it. Because it's kind of like with a kid, right, who wants the ice cream. Now, you can't really say that the kid wants the ice cream, but rather there's a part inside the child that identifies with the ice cream. And when the ice cream gets purchased, then it satisfies that part of the child. And therefore, it seems that as though now the child is happy. So it's not really the child that has benefited, but it's actually the part of the child that identifies with that ice cream. So in that same way, I started to ask, well, it cannot be the I who's benefiting, but it's something in me that wants all of this. So then this created this split. Then who is the real I here? And who is this I who wants and can never get enough? In fact, whenever he gets enough, the next logical question is, okay, how can I have more? Right? So he's never happy. So this brought that question of inquiring whether there's more to life than just into gaining things. So I went into different spiritual practices, spent hours and hours a day. I think it was about 15 or 16 hours a day meditating, because I got initiated into different Kriya Yoga practices. And these practices are basically meant to, you move your, quote, energy up and down the spine. And you get into really high states, into feel like bliss. It's absolute. In fact, it was one of the best times of my life, I got to admit. And the person starts to sleep maybe around 2 or 3 hours. You really don't need to sleep when you do these practices. So I thought, wow, this is amazing. But then again, the question, how will more of this make more difference, and to whom? Right? So again, that question could not be answered. So eventually, one day, I wanted to pay respect to Ramana Maharishi, who I read his books. I read many books by then. I Am That, talks with Ramana Maharishi, and I went to many spiritual pilgrimages, learned about Taoism, Mahayana Buddhism, Kashmir Shaivism, a little bit of Tantra, a few more practices. Hatha Yoga, that was my favorite also, and Tai Chi Chuan from I Ching. And eventually I wanted to go to Arunachala to pay respect to Ramana Maharishi. So then at the same time, there was a seminar going on by James, who was doing a Bhagavad Gita course. He was basically condensing the 18 chapters, more like 17 chapters, into 25 days. So I thought I'm going to attend this because, you know, you want to spend some time learning. And that is when I really got humbled, because that's the first time I realized how much I don't know. In other words, I came in with spiritual pride. That means I've done this, I've done that. And I even remember how I was looking at the audience from the back going, oh, you know, I've done so many things, right? You've got so much more to get there. So there's this spiritual arrogance that's going on. And of course, this for the first time I saw this, because James really showed us how the vision of reality. And it really made me question myself even further. But at the same time, it caused me to inquire into this I. He gave me knowledge, which I was able to answer this question. How is this going to make more difference, and to whom? Who is this I? So for 4 months or 6 plus minus months, I was inquiring for another 15 hours a day in the light of this knowledge that was provided by James at Arunachala. And slowly, this clarity started to come, because the notions were starting to get removed. They were dissolved one by one, slowly. And at the same time, during that span of maybe 1 year, since I saw James, I got involved with Chinmaya mission at Kerala, more like the Chinmaya Research Institute at Kerala, because they have wonderful programs there and have great acharyas. And I was educated by 2 acharyas they were both women, and they really helped me even further from a different angle, because everyone uses different language. So I'm really also grateful to them for moving me forward. And also Advayananda, he's my #1 teacher there, who's very technical, and that's the kind of mind that appeals to me. So he helped me a lot, because I think very logically and rationally. And he thinks, he's able to appease that sort of mind. And at the same time, maybe a few months after meeting those teachers at Chinmaya, I also finally met Nima. And how did this happen? It happened because I became a very good friend with one of the friends who I met at James those 25 days. And he told me about Nima, and I thought, I don't need a teacher, because James is already fine. I've already got everything I need. But then actually I had a few friends there. So they both went to Nima and they said that she's excellent. You really have to go. So again, I took a leap of faith. And when I met her, it's for the first time, I really caught the essence of this word, G-U-R-U, guru. And for the first time, I sort of connected that deeply into this, what it means to be held, like protected by this tradition. And slowly started to form more admiration for Nima, because she is very down to earth. And that is my style. Everything I do, I always bring it down to earth. So now the reason I'm saying all of this is, as I said before, I want you to know where I'm coming from. So when I teach, I'm not just, sort of locked into one world and going, okay, well, let me tell you about spirituality, but not having any worldly success. Most of my life is from that worldly success of financial independence and managing your time and being productive and you're thinking creatively and expressing yourself and being sort of a free, healthy human being. All of that I've gone into. And I always bring that into Vedanta. So when I teach, I bring these 2 worlds together, and I always bring it down to earth. How can we apply this, and how can we bring context so that it is actually livable, and it's not just some theory up in the air? It sounds good, like a satsang, and then you just get high maybe for 2 days, right? Plus minus. and then the person goes back into their default conditioning. So that is a little bit about me, and of course, many more things happen in between. And I would also like to hear about you, because I'll tell you why. Because as I said, I'm not the kind of person that sort of goes mass. I like personal. I want to know about people. So I'm interested in your story. Just tell me a little bit about who you are, and your name, and just anything about yourself. I don't want to narrow down the question specifically so that I can let you speak. Okay? I think that's okay now that I have introduced myself. Before I go forward, I want to thank Jivita for reminding me that today is actually an auspicious day.
Krishna Janmashtami.
Yeah, it's Krishna Janmashtami. And today, per the Vedic calendar, it is calculated that Krishna is born. And I didn't know that, because I realized, wow, what an auspicious day to begin this. So that's super auspicious today that we'll come together on Krishna's birth. So it's very relevant to what we're now doing, because we're doing the Mahabharata and the Gita, where Krishna is the main character. So this means we haven't set this up on a random date. It was, there was something going on perhaps in the background. I don't know what. And say, why is the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, significant and applicable in today's world? The basic message of the Gita is that there is only one irreducible reality here, and that I am. That's the summary of the Gita. That means that reality is without a second. Now, what happens is when people hear this message, depending on what we know or what we don't know, people start to sort of pretend, okay, I am now the whole reality, I am the whole. And this produces so many psychological problems, like spiritual pride, a little bit of arrogance, a little bit of superiority or inferiority, or a whole bunch of contradictions. Because the point is, even if one says, I am the one whole reality that is irreducible, and that whole reality is also the reality of everything else, but at the same time, all of these psychological pressures from the past are coming in throughout the days, then it creates a contradiction. And because of this contradiction, it erases this message. So over time, we forget what we were coming here to do in the first place. So because of these psychological pressures, it is why it's vital to first address the down-to-earth psychology that human beings go through. And that is where the Mahabharata comes into play, right? So it's easy to now talk about this high knowledge and go, okay, wow, it's so fascinating. But it simply does not last, because there is still a wounded mind. And when that wounded mind is first addressed, only then can knowledge properly take place without it being pushed by these what's called samskaras, or these impressions, which are constantly sort of dropping down and saying, oh, please move away, give me attention. So the other problems that get created by having this vision, or even philosophizing about it, is a person starts to reject life. That means they start to push life away. They say, okay, so I am the ultimate reality, and this world here that we live in, it's not, right? And because it's not, I don't need to be involved in it. I don't need to participate in it. So through the course of time, the person sort of doesn't put so much investment or dedication into their work. And it could be very subtle. It can be something like not fully loving, or not fully wanting to have a full conversation. So small things like this start to create these psychological pressures. The other one is a common that goes through the spiritual world is you have to be desireless. I'm sure you've heard this before. Now tell me, can you be desireless? No way. Desire to be born, the nature of a human being is to go through life. And every going, every step of the way implies there's a desire to move forward. So these notions that I have to be desireless and, not, or sometimes don't even look at women because they're the instigators of desire. And then, they're the ones who create the samsara. This is ludicrous. In other words, they're coming from wrong ideas or misinterpreted notions which haven't been looked at. Now imagine someone like this with these ideas, here's the vision, says, all that is here is one without a second, and that you are. While at the same time now they're going, okay, I don't need to desire things, don't look at this, don't look at that. I mean, wait a minute. If everything's the whole, where's their question of rejecting things? Where's the question of pushing things away? So it doesn't make sense. The other common statement is you have to do things, but just don't expect any results. It's it's what a common karma yoga statement. Do things without expecting any results. Tell me, are you really willing to do things and not even caring about what happens? No way. Face it, we all care about what we do. And we all do have, as human beings, we do have some form of we have some sort of, I want something to happen. It's not that we're not trying to live off that sort of desire, but I'm saying that we cannot push away humanity because there is a human being here, and that human being, that he or she does want something in return. That means something that, for example, if I was talking and I see you all on the mobile phones, now, according to this philosophy, I'm supposed to go, okay, so just do my duty, just, teach. But, I don't care what you're doing. It doesn't matter to me. Of course, it doesn't matter. So notions like this have to be firstly corrected before the big vision can take place. The other is emotion is an illusion, or it serves no purpose. I mean, how is that possible? To be born equals to emote. I'm not talking about sentimentality. That means being emotional. I'm just talking about going through the day means we will emote through what happens. And we have to emote. That's how we communicate honestly. Even to be honest with something or with someone is to emote in that moment. Even to hug a child is to emote. So again, we cannot buy into these statements which are not looked into. The other is, a common one is, okay, since everything is one here, it's a one non-dual reality, just love everyone. Heard that? Just hug everyone. You got to love everyone equally. If someone can love everyone equally, please find them. I'd like to speak to them. What's going on? Impossible. So the idea is if we're all just one, I'm not allowed to get angry. I'm not allowed to criticize. I'm not allowed to judge. All of these I'm not allowed to's. In other words, what this ends up doing is it suppresses the individual who's quacking on about being the whole. Again, it creates resistance in life. So life ends up being reduced. The whole point of this is to expand our vision of life rather than to reduce it in the name of don't desire things, don't get involved with things, don't look at beauty, right? And so on. The other common one is, I'm sure you've all heard of it, is I am not this body mind. How's that? I am not this body mind. First of all, there is reality in that statement. But in order to say that statement, so much context has already taken place. Now, to say I am not this body and mind is not what Advaita says, not what traditional Advaita Vedanta says. This is called pseudo-spirituality. This is called neo-Advaita, where the basis of the message is, it goes like this. I am not this body mind, I am consciousness, full stop. That's all. And somehow this ends up being expanded into these huge, long satsangs that I don't know how it happens. What Vedanta says is you are so much more than this body mind. Can you hear the difference between version A? Version A, you're not this body mind. Notice how it closes down the conversation. There's nothing else to say. Versus, you're so much more than this body mind. Now, immediately, what does this do? It opens up inquiry. I want to now know, how is that so? Tell me more. So these statements is what we want to address. Otherwise, they end up getting in these condensed one-liners and they distort our reality even further. Then the person ends up chasing things which simply do not have a way to be solved. In other words, they create more complexities in life. So, what is the context of the Bhagavad Gita in today's world? That was the original question. The context is it clears up these misinterpretations. That's why it's not a one-off. It's not a one-time satsang. It lasts some months, maybe years. Because what happens is the mind is so genius, it keeps on trying to distort what it hears according to its past conditioning. And sometimes this happens unknowingly. The conditioning falls and then it overlays what has been said, and then through time, that creates distortions and conflicts in life. So what does Bhagavad Gita do? It reiterates the same message over and over so that we do not fall into this trap of taking a statement like I am not this body mind and then living in that statement as though it is the reality, while behind the scenes there's problems in life, there's conflicts, there's one's not addressing others properly, one's not willing to participate, one's looking down on people, while at the same time this vision is I am beyond this world. No. So we need to address these notions over and over again. And what happens as a result of this? Our decisions become clear. One of our common challenges is, how do I decide in such a way that it leads to a successful resolution or a successful progression, a successful advancement in life? How do I have that clarity that lets me make a decision and looking back 1 year from now, I say, I'm so glad I made that decision. Looking back 5 years from now, I can say, I'm so glad I made every decision and I would not change a single thing. So this is what we call having clarity. And how to establish that clarity? Through the Bhagavad Gita teaching. So again, this is where the context of the Gita comes. It's not just about talking, with the big vision. It's about making decisions in life that make both and sustain your happiness and the happiness of those around you. Because it's not just about us. You know that if one person's not in a good mood or something, then those around them also capture that. So we also end up affecting others. So as a human being, indeed, we do have a responsibility not only to sustain our harmony, but also with that comes the harmony of those around us. The other thing is how to cope with situations. This is also a relevant situation. What we often do in life is we cope, like whatever is up, whatever is going on, we find a way to cope. For example, I'll get into this coping method much later in the Mahabharata, is something unpleasant happens, however momentary that in a short while, but then we find ineffective coping methods. For example, the COVID, one of the coping methods I've heard is alcohol. Some people develop the alcohol habits. How is that going to play out in 5 years? Is the person going to be looking 5 years from now and going, oh, I'm so glad I took up alcohol. Probably not. The other is we have to integrate this into daily behavior. So this is where it really comes down to, is finding the way of taking this big vision and translating it to how does this actually come into a physical, tangible, concrete way, whereby not only my behaviors exude this knowledge, but my words also symbolize this knowledge or always point back to the knowledge, but also the decisions I make with those who are close to me are in the name of this knowledge. And this knowledge, of course, is that knowledge of clarity, which looking back 5 years from now, you would say, I'm so glad I've made those decisions. Okay, so again, how is the Gita relevant? It gives what we would call lucidity. Lucidity means clear-headedness, and clear-headedness means it's sound. Whatever comes up, whatever you say, whatever you think, there is some education behind it. And when I say education, I mean education in the light of the Bhagavad Gita. That means education as Krishna would, decide. Now, why do I say as Krishna would decide? Because, as we will get into this, the Mahabharata is not a story that happened some time long ago, however many years. It is a story of humanity. And what we will learn is that in the Mahabharata, even good people make mistakes. That's the message of the Mahabharata. For example, Yudhishthira, we all think that, there's this Pandavas, they're the good side, and then the Kauravas, they're the bad side. We will also see that we cannot put things into black or white. Life is not linear. There's no such thing as it is like this or it's like that. Reality has layers within layers within layers, and every one of those layers has to get addressed and understood so that clarity can ensue. Whereas if I look at one side of the things or one layer and I say, that's it, now I know, then all of these other layers remain unaddressed, and again, it creates contradictions in life. So we need to look at these layers within layers so that we can establish this vision and make decisions in a proper educated light. Now, before resuming the Gita, and I'm going to open up the conversation soon, I understand we're all listening still. We are on chapter 10, but we're not going to go into chapter 10 immediately. I want to first give us a context of the Gita by giving us a story of the Mahabharata. So I'm curious, how many of us are knowledgeable or have seen or have read the Mahabharata? Can you put your hand up? Okay, I can see one hand, two hands, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I can see 2 hands. I can see 10 fingers there. Jivata, okay, lovely. Okay, almost all of us. I'm really glad about that. That means we can have a more stimulating conversation. But nevertheless, if we haven't, I'm not going to give the details because my intention is to go to the main themes, the main sections, which will instigate a discussion. And these themes are something that we can all relate to. So we don't have to know about names and so on. So in the Mahabharata, there is a king called King Vichitravirya. And this king had 2 princesses, Dhritarashtra and Pandu. Dhritarashtra married Gandhari. He was the elder brother, that means he was older than Pandu, and he had 100 sons. They were called the Kauravas. The oldest of the Kauravas was Duryodhana. Okay, so that's Dhritarashtra. Then we had Pandu, the younger son. Also, Dhritarashtra was blind. Now, before moving to Pandu, I wanted to address this. The symbolism behind Mahabharata can be many angles depending on how we look at them. So on one hand, we can look at Dhritarashtra's blindness as physical. On the other hand, we can also look at his blindness as in uninformed, not willing to listen, not willing to take advice of those who can actually advise to move, to evolve. So this is a very common character that we all share also, by the way. We all have Dhritarashtra in us, whereas there is resistance towards some teachings, or we are not willing to see, not willing to investigate. And we also have Pandu in us now. Who's Pandu? Pandu was the younger brother. He married Kunti. Yes, I know he had 2 wives, but I'm just going to simplify it. And he had 5 sons: Yudhishthira, Arjun, Bhim, Nakul, and Sahadev. Okay. Now, Dhritarashtra, being older, was entitled to the kingdom. He was supposed to inherit the kingdom, but that was impossible. Why? Because he was blind. In other words, only Pandu could rule. Now, this created resentment in Dhritarashtra. Why? Because he couldn't rule and he was the older, and he felt like, I'm entitled to rule. Pandu noticed that he was uncomfortable. He noticed his resentment. He noticed his agitation. He noticed his discomfort. So Pandu did all he could to try to alleviate, to pay due respect to his brother. So he treated him very well because he knew that he's helpless. Dhritarashtra is blind, so he can't rule. So let's open up a conversation. Firstly, when we hear of Dhritarashtra as someone who was angry, someone who resented his situation, immediately we get an image in our minds and we say, wow, so this guy obviously, was angry. So this is our first judgment. This is how we first, go, okay, so he's blind and he's resented, so he's obviously the bad guy now. But it's not like that. Because if you put yourself in a situation also whereby you were, disabled in some way or the other, and it was your privilege, you felt like, and why me? Like, God, why am I disabled? Isn't that how we would all feel? We would sort of have this resentment in us. We would all sort of, feel like life is not treating me right. So in that same way, Dhritarashtra felt like that. So again, we cannot put people in boxes. We can't put, okay, so he's resentful, he doesn't know how to manage his emotions, that's it, full stop. In other words, the mind is highly complex. So to say and to give one opinion to a mind simply is not fair onto the individual, but it's also not fair onto the one who imparts that opinion, because it closes down the inquiry. It stops any kind of investigation. It just sort of says, okay, this is how it is. This is how that politician is. They are like this, full stop. What kind of person does this create over time? Probably stubborn. Probably, and the stubborn, there's good stubborn, there's bad stubborn. Now, see, even good and bad stubborn in itself, we can investigate what that means. But when I say stubborn, that is more of a closure or unwillingness to see if there is more than what I'm seeing. So over time, this creates a dull intellect, because the person who just keeps on putting labels onto people, this is how he or she is, and this is how he or she is, full stop. that actually doubts the person's own intellect, because they're not thinking what more is there other than what I am seeing right now. And okay, so the story continues. So one day, Pandu he became a very successful king. He ruled the kingdom and everyone liked him. He was very well known. So one day he decided to temporarily take a break and go to the forest, just retire temporarily. And he requested Dhritarashtra to rule the kingdom on his behalf while he is taking a vacation in the forest. So now this is the point where problems came. Okay, so far everything's good. Now the problems start to come. So what happened? So one day, Pandu was in the forest hunting. He had his bow and arrow. And he heard a noise that seemed like it was a noise of an animal. I believe it was a deer, a mrgaha, Thomas will know. Shaking his head. And he mistook that voice. And as a result, he drew his arrow and he released it, and it pierced and mortally wounded both the sage and his wife. So he didn't know it was a sage and his wife. He thought it was an animal. And as soon as he released his arrow, he realized, oh my goodness, what have I done? Now, this is a good example where once we release an arrow, there's no stopping. Right? So this is what we call the law of karma, cause and effect. Once we put out an action, even if you realize, even while that arrow is traveling and you go, oh my goodness, it's actually a man and a woman, even then the arrow is not going to turn around and go, okay, I'll give you some empathy, I'm just going to miss them. So this is how this cause and effect works. Once we put out an action, that's it. It's beyond your control. So where is your control? In the action itself. Now, I want to bring a little bit closer into the action part. What do you think, this is where the questions now come, what do you think is the symbolism of Pandu accidentally killing the sage and his wife? What do you think this is supposed to represent? Unmute yourself and you can let me know.
Ignorance.
Ignorance. Okay. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Pandu didn't know that there was the sage. They were sitting over there. He didn't know about them at all. He thought that it was a deer. So, I mean, I would like to correlate it by certain kind of actions we do in our lives that we don't know that it can hurt somebody. It is our sheer ignorance, but we do it.
Good. Okay. Okay. So, Mauktik. Am I getting your name? Mauktik. Okay. Very good. So, what Mauktik is saying is, I'll just expand a little bit. We all come with inherent ignorance. That means if I ask you right now, how fast does the speed of sound travel? Nobody knows. What's the color of a snail? Now I have to go think. I have to remember. So we all come with inherent ignorance, and we then have to learn to remove ignorance about the world. Even if I ask you, what is 25 to the power of 638? Now we have to actually recall all of our maths knowledge, and we have to apply, our mental process to figure this out. So it's not known. We have to use a process to figure things out. Now, the amount of knowledge that we receive depends on whom? Does it depend on society? Does it depend on you? Since you are born, it depends on you.
Most of the time.
In other words, we can have two people born in the same family, and one son can go and, play with the kids, which is nothing wrong with that, but they can just do the same thing over and not get educated. Just enjoy themselves and go here, go there, have fun. Okay. But then the other side chooses to use their time wisely. So they develop skills, they develop proficiency, and they refine their skills. So what happens over time is you have A and you have B. Now, because A has willingly taken the time to get educated, what is the chance of them making a mistake, as if you compare that to one who simply just sort of goes mechanically? That means they just take basic skills of survival and, just doing things that get you through the day. It is very likely that person B, who doesn't get educated, will make many more mistakes. So what we can first draw from this is that even good people like Pandu is a good person, even they are negligent. There is no such person in this world that is not negligent. In fact, if we try to be perfect, the irony of this is it actually creates resistance to living, and it creates an unlikable person, because we all know those who are trying to be perfect, it's kind of very hard to speak to them. We cannot, there's like some resistance there. So firstly, we need to understand that everyone is negligent. However, this does not give us license to use that and say, oh, I'm just a human being, I'm negligent. Can't do anything about it. I'm not perfect. I don't know. I don't have all knowledge. So this means Pandu what happened after he shot the arrow? The sage cursed him. He said, if you ever try to, because of this negligence, if you ever try to get intimate with your wife, you will immediately die. So what happened here? First of all, a good person can also be negligent. He wasn't doing it intentionally, but it still does not justify him going, oh, sorry, sorry, man, my mistake. Because the point is, he was negligent. He didn't look closer. He didn't think. He didn't use his analysis to go, what is this really? In other words, what happens is if we don't use our full capacity of the mind, then we release the arrow, and what happens? It comes back to us. It hurts us. Why? Because I am the one who released the arrow without thinking. So we cannot now use this principle of, well, we're all negligent, well, no one's perfect, and then try to go through life as though it's okay to be, half contribute. Now, why else is Pandu deserving of this punishment? Because this is symbolism. Because even if a person is born conditioned, that means they're born in an unfortunate family, even that does not qualify them or give them excuse to run an irresponsible life. Why? Because every single day we have a new opportunity to educate ourselves, to expand our vision, to refine our thinking, to decide how else can I use this capacity of the mind to inquire into things and try to make the best of my days. In other words, a child born in an unprivileged family has no more or less excuse than one who is born in a rich family, because we are both given equal amount of time, equal amount of education, equal amount of opportunity, equal amount of everything that is available to everyone else to learn, to discover, to sharpen our intellects, to sharpen our thinking capacity. And if we don't, who gets that discomfort? We do. So again, what is the message here? First of all, there's no excuse to say, sorry, my bad. That's not good enough. A human being means a thinking being. In fact, the word manusya means thinking being. It doesn't mean a mechanical being. Okay, there is a voice of something that sounds similar to an animal. Okay, release arrow. That's called a robot. It's not like a programming language. If this, then that. So there's so much more thinking that needs to come into the picture before we make a decision. Okay, now, okay, and what's the benefit of this? If we start to use our minds, the benefit is it makes you into a really good problem solver. Instead of going mechanically by things, because we know that life is not linear. So if we apply the same past conditioning, try to bring it into the present, because the present is different than the past, what's going to happen? Since they're incompatible, the past has no connection to the present, then the present obviously is not going to work out as I would have expected it to, because it's a new situation, it's a new circumstance, it's a new argument, it's a new discussion that we have to address. So before, what's the time? Oh, we got 2 minutes. All right.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, yes, name please? I'm not seeing it here.
Yeah, this is Meena.
Meena, hi.
Hi. So what I understand, and know about Pandu is that he was by nature was not a negligent person. But in this particular case, something happened, he was negligent, and then he, shot the arrow. So my question is, what causes negligence in a human being? Pandu was an educated person. He was of, a reasonable caliber. He was ruling the entire nation as well. So what caused the negligence to happen in this case for Pandu?
Okay. So what causes negligence in a human being? Well, first of all, yeah, so first of all, as I said, negligence is not going to, first of all, negligence is going to come. We can first accept that, because it is impossible to be 100% of the time true and accurate in everything that we do. So first of all, that's just the way it is. However, despite that reality, why does negligence come? Because I'm doing things mechanically. I do things without thinking, putting thought into it. So if you just look at Pandu, he absolutely had the chance to stop and listen twice versus once and respond. In other words, what causes a person to make these negligent decisions? Reacting versus responding. Reacting means if this, then that. Responding means I'm choosing to take just one extra moment to see what is really the case here. It's the same with the conversation. If you say one thing and I just sort of like react, then that is what? Negligence on my part. Why? Because I'm not willing to listen. So what causes negligence in a human being? Mechanical reaction, if we want to just condense it together. Okay.
Could I say something?
Yes, please.
I was just going to say, could it be said that negligence would be the default position unless you've got an intention? And then to have that intention in your awareness means that your negligence is to the things that aren't in your attention. Is that a way of being able to see it?
Say that again.
I was just thinking there as you were talking that negligence is kind of a default position of ignorance, because unless you have intention and awareness of that intention, then the negligence will just be there anyway.
Yeah, that's what I said. It will be there. And that's why I said you're not going to ever, be perfect in all that you do. But still, the point here in this particular section, it is not to use this point of, okay, we're ignorant, we don't know everything, and then to use that as an excuse not to put my full effort, not to put my full commitment, devotion forward. In other words, no matter how much a person thinks they're good at something, it does not qualify them to rest in that goodness, because the moment they do, it's downhill. Because as I said before, every situation demands a new response. It's never like yesterday. So in that way, what causes negligence understanding that every situation is new, and every new situation deserves a new way of looking into it. And what does this newness mean? I'm constantly engaging my mind in the environment. And this actually brings you so much more benefit, because then everything else becomes so much more interesting versus just sort of, spontaneously flying through things because I've done it before.
Can I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
It's
Yes.
Mohan.
Yeah, Mohan.
If we were to put this in an abstract sense in terms of answering Nina's question, and the point raised earlier about awareness, who was that? Yep. So if we were to raise it one level beyond the individuals, awareness is the dimension that you talked about earlier, Andre, about body, mind, and you're something more than the body and mind.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say for the time being that your awareness is another dimension of yourself. Awareness leads to not making mistakes, in a sense. When you're connected to your awareness, when you're alert, aware, you're connected to your other dimension, if you want, rather than just be reactive as your mind is trained and your body is able to shoot. You're programmed, and I use the term programmed. So when you're connected to your body and mind, you react without being aware. So if you were to raise it to that level, you're saying that cause and effect starts happening in nature, in the universe, when there is lack of awareness. There is a level of automation. And in a sense that feeds the cause and effect and what happens in life and in nature all the time, feeding the cycle of karma and the interconnectedness between the one who shoots the arrow, for instance, and the one who has shot at you. And then you get into the cycle of, if you want, universal karma. So if you raise it to that level of abstraction, then the cause of the action, like you said, is you made a mistake, you're not aware. So it's the connection to awareness that prevents this cause and effect from happening.
I agree with that. The only thing that I do avoid at all costs is the word awareness. Awareness is, first of all, we're only going to reserve that for consciousness, Atma. I want to just suggest that the word is alertness. In other words, we're increasing our alertness to situations. Even now, as you're listening, for example, so, we all like kind of looking into the screen. But suppose now there's some sound, there's a burglar outside the house, and we're like totally into the screen right now, and we're totally oblivious to that. So increasing our alertness simply means becoming more expansive. That means, and when I say expansive, I just mean I'm including more things into what's happening right now. Now you say, well, how is that possible? How do you now become more expansive? Well, first of all, there's no direct answer to that. There's no technique to expand, to make yourself more expansive. It just comes through, as we said before, inquiry, through thinking, through looking into things, through asking questions into reality, into building, into getting a sense of involvement in the world. So all of these things, and when I say involvement in the world, I mean as in not, just sort of I'm here indoors and that's all there is to it, because then, we lose connection with the outside. But also the important thing about this alertness, it is not just alertness out there. It's also talking about alertness of my own thoughts. So it's two aspects here. Because often we would take this alertness as in be alert of your 5 senses that are being received. The other aspect is being alert of what is my thought process undergoing right now. What is it thinking in response to this statement? For example, when Pandu heard this sound that resembled an animal, that was reproduced in the mind as a thought process. But was Pandu fully alert to that thought process? Probably half, we could say. Because if it was full, then we would say, well, okay, wait a minute. It doesn't sound exactly like the animal. There's some different sounds. In other words, I put half alertness onto my own thoughts, and therefore the thought now only partially resembles the experience. So what do? I assume, and I go, okay, here's what I think it is. Why? Because I was not alert, or quote, mindful, that's another word you can say, mindful to my thought processes. So that's just a little of a, I don't use the word awareness or being conscious or any of that, just because there's always a mind's operating. Yes, awareness is shining on the mind all the time. So there's no question of being aware or conscious. It's just using the mind to be alert. Okay, does that answer a little bit, Mina?
Yes, I think yes. So my takeaways were that Pandu was not alert,
yeah,
and he did not put second thought. So he was not mindful, or before taking the action, he did not think enough, and therefore we can say that he was negligent, but he was not, and that caused ignorance.
Yeah, and that caused him suffering. Yeah, good.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Hi, Andre. I have a question here. So I understand this entire concept of negligence you just talked about is set in the context of Pandu shooting the arrow. But my question is, shouldn't it also be in the quality of a sage who is more enlightened than an ignorant king in forgiving the king for being ignorant of his actions? So Pandu shot the arrow, but I don't understand why the sage couldn't have forgiven him rather than cursing him for his ignorance, basically. So, as a human, I have reasonable limits to how careful I can be, right, at any moment. Like, there are some reasonable limits that my mind has. Like, I cannot be careful 100% of my time. So, acceptance of my carelessness should also be important, right? I can, of course, try to be careful all the time, but there is also a reasonable limit to it, and then beyond which I have to be careless because that's the nature of the human, right? So, that's the.
No, you don't have to be careless.
Could you also say that it's the negligence would be by living with the attachment to the emotion or the thought and not doing proper application of the intellect?
Not doing proper application of the intellect. Explain that, Martin.
Well, the mindfulness is where you're actually using the intellect rather than just reacting on the emotion or reacting on the thought, which are both unreal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, however, okay, and thought and emotion, they're always connected. I mean, there's no question of ignoring one or the other. If there's a thought of fear, then that's definitely going to come with an emotion of fear.
But I think if you're living in deep attachment to any particular thought or any particular emotion at that point in time, you're going to be negligent on the outcome of the action.
Okay, good point. So what Martin is bringing is, okay, now this is actually bringing two questions. Is attachment to that thought, which caused him to react, and the quality of the sage. Okay. So I'm going to put question 1 and question 2, and I'm going to reserve this for the next week because I like to stay on time. It's 8:10 now. Okay, but I like Mautik's questions. Excellent question. It really does also depend. And now the question what he asked is, what role does the sage play in response to this situation? And is there something the sage could have done? All right. So next week we will meet at the same time. And again, I want to thank very much for all of us coming together. It's nice that we can all engage. And as I said, this is the idea, to contribute. That's how we learn. And we have so much more to discuss through this story and delve into the human experience, because that's what the Mahabharata is about. Okay, so next time we will meet, and I'm going to close. Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha. Sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.